Honorables membres du comité, je constate
Honorable committee members, I see that we have quorum.
3A. As the clerk of the committee, I will preside over the election of the chair and the vice chairs. Je dois informer les membres que la greffière du comité ne peut recevoir
I must inform members that the clerk of the committee can only receive motions for the election of the chair. The clerk cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, nor participate in debate.
proceed to the election of the chair.
Excusez-moi, Madame la Présidente. C'est toujours un
Madam
peu...
Chair, or Madam Clerk, the sound in the room is much too loud. We cannot hear interpreters without having the volume in the earpiece very loud. If we could lower the volume in the room, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, or chair, clerk, or raise the level in our earpieces. One of the two, because it's even. I have to have full volume just to hear the voice. So.
Est-ce que c'est correct, Monsieur Thériault?
En salle, d'abord.
You'd have to
Parlez en-
speak so that we hear the volume in the room first.
Is the interpretation working now?
L'interprétation fonctionnait, Madame.
There's not an issue with interpretation. The problem is when you're speaking, the volume in the room is too loud, and so I can't hear interpreters. And because the volume in the room is too loud, I have to increase the volume in my earpiece to the max. And even then, I can't hear interpreters. So I've asked for the room volume to be lowered. We're going to work on that now, Mr. Thériault.
Honorables membres du comité, je constate
Honorable committee members, I see that we have quorum.
063A. As the clerk of the committee, I will preside over the election of the chair and the vice chairs. Je dois informer les membres que la greffière
I must inform members that the clerk of the committee can only receive motions for the election of the chair. The clerk cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, nor participate in debate.
can now proceed to the election of the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062. Yes, Ms. Sidhu?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I want to motion Dr. Hattie Fry. I want to nominate as a chair of the committee.
Il est proposé par
It has been moved by Ms. Sidhu that Dr. Fry be elected as chair of the committee. Are there any further motions?
I will now put the motion to the committee. It has been moved by Ms. Sidhu that Dr. Fry be elected as chair of the committee. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion? Je déclare la motion adoptée et
I declare the motion carried and Dr. Fry duly elected chair of the committee. I invite Dr. Fry to take the chair.
Bonjour tout le monde et merci
Good
beaucoup.
morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for this honor.
To the clerk to continue with the election of the vice chairs.
Conformément à l'article 106.2,
Pursuant to Standing Order 106.2, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair.
oui, Monsieur Poloski.
C'est
Mr.
mon
Pulaski?
plaisir, honneur
I
de
have the pleasure to nominate my friend Luc Thériault as vice chair of the committee. It must be a member of the official opposition, Mr. Poloski.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like to nominate Dan Mazur.
Il est proposé par Mr. Strauss
It has been moved by Mr. Strauss that Mr. Mazur be elected as first vice chair of the committee.
Saying none, I will now put the motion to the committee. It has been moved by Mr. Strauss that Mr. Mazur be elected as first vice chair of the committee. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion? Je déclare la motion adoptée.
I declare the motion carried and Mr. Mazur duly elected first vice chair of the committee.
Nous allons maintenant procéder à
We are
l'élection.
now going to move to the election of second vice chair of the committee.
C'est mon honneur.
It is my honor and I'm pleased to nominate once again my friend Luc Thériault for the second vice chair of the committee.
Proposé par M.
It has been moved by Mr. Poloski that Mr. Thériault be elected as second vice chair of the committee.
Saying none, I will now put the motion to the committee. It has been moved by Mr. Poloski that Mr. Thériault be elected as second vice chair of the committee. Plaît-il au comité d'adopter la motion?
Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion?
Je déclare la motion
I
adoptée.
declare the motion carried and Mr. Thériault duly elected second vice chair of the committee.
J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I call this meeting to order.
Welcome to the meeting number 1 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Bienvenue à la réunion de numéro
Welcome to meeting number 1 of the Standing Committee on Health of the House of Commons.
in a hybrid format, I think, but I think everybody's here, so I think we're all here. It's taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Before we continue, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures were in place to help prevent audio feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You will also notice a QR code in front of you, and that's on the card, which links to a short awareness video if you wanted to see it. I want to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select, I'm going to read this performer, guys, even though there's nobody on Zoom right now, right? So for those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. And please turn it off when you've spoken. Otherwise, we will have all kinds of heritage hands up there. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and so we appreciate your patience and understanding, because if we're looking around the room, whoever catches our eye first is the one whose hand we will see. But we're going to try to do this as well as we can. So now we're going to proceed to routine motions. With the agreement of the committee, we can proceed to the consideration of routine motions. Now, the clerk has circulated a list of draft routine motions that the committee adopted in the last parliamentary session. And so I think we need to have a committee member move the motion, and so we can do it one by one to allow debate on each one of the motions. Many of them, again, are just routine motions, so before we put it to the vote. So I'm going to open the floor to recognize a member to speak, to move the motions. Ms. Chi?
Do I just read
Yes.
them out one by one, right? Analyst service. That the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist it in its work. Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure. That the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and be...
Let's deal with each motion separately. Thank you, Ms. Chi. So we'll go ahead, and any debate on this motion? Can I entertain a vote on the motion? Those in favor? Those opposed? There's no one opposing. The motion is carried. Second motion, anyone?
Chair. Chair.
Pardon?
Point of order.
Yes.
Point of order.
The analysts
Point
are
of
in the
order.
room. Can you please come to your chairs? Thank you. And maybe you can introduce yourselves. Sorry, Mr. Strauss. Oh, sorry, Dan.
Yeah, can we just, once we're done this, is there a reason why we're reading out each individual one? And we just adopt?
Just in case somebody I want to be fair, just in case somebody didn't like it,
Okay.
even though it's routine, somebody might object this time. So
That's
let's
fair.
just
We got
get
a lot of
it
new
done
faces around, so good.
appropriately. Thank you. So these are our analysts, and perhaps I can let you introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Farah, and this is my colleague, Duquin.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
We were also the analysts for HESA in the previous session, so looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
My name is Tu Quintrin. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's good. And so then, anybody want to move the next motion, guys? I don't have those motions, actually. Yes, please. I'd like to. Go ahead. Yes, Ms. Chi.
Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure. That the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and be composed of 4 members, the chair and 1 member from each organized party, a recognized party as designated by each party's whip, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration.
Any debate on this motion? Shall I call the question? Those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Go ahead again. Will we let Ms. Chi read them all out? Okay, go ahead, Ms. Chi.
To do that, meeting without a quorum, that the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence and to have that evidence published when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition parties and 2 members of the government party.
Any debate on this? Did you put up your hand, Dan? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Those in favor? Those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Ms. Chi?
This one, when traveling outside of the parliamentary precinct, A, the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of whether quorum is present. B, no substantive motion may be moved during such meetings.
Debate? No. Those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried.
Time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. That witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statements. That whenever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statement 72 hours in advance. That at the discretion of the chair during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first questioner of each party as follows. Round 1, Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes. Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes.
Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Pulaski.
I'm not going to propose it for this time around because there hasn't been consultation. But given we're Health Committee, there should be a requirement that any conflict of interest be declared beforehand, which I think has become the standard in medicine. Again, having not consulted anybody on this, I'm not proposing this, but at some point, I think we ought to make that a requirement.
Thank you. So now, with regard to the current
Chair?
motion, yes, Luc.
Oui, je sais que
I know that we've discussed the speaking time, but I would like to state that during the previous parliament, the NDP was a recognized party and they received the same amount of time as the Bloc. And so I was expecting for the Bloc to receive additional time for questioning because there was 12 minutes for the third and fourth party. I have the same time as I did last time, even though the NDP does not have any questions. I just wanted to ask colleagues for some flexibility. 2.5 minutes is not a lot. And I would like to remind everyone that the NDP only had about 20 MPs last time, and they still had the same amount of time as the Bloc, who had 32 MPs at the time. I don't necessarily want us to debate on this, but I would ask for your flexibility in perhaps changing things eventually. During one of the studies that we carried out, there was so much flexibility that when we did our study on high-risk medical devices and memory implants, the Conservatives had given me their time in order to start the study. There was good collaboration at that time, and so I just wanted to share this, and I wanted to ask for flexibility. I want us to be able to have the best interactions possible with our witnesses. Thank you.
I think I'm going to like this committee since you're all so flexible and work with each other so nicely. It's going to be great. So, Dan?
Just on that, thank you, Chair. Just on that, we did the same thing when I was on Environment Committee. If it was on when we set the rules for the study, that's when we look at the allocation for time. So that's the way I did it on the other committees. So, or even witness by witness, if you had a special witness, and then we always swap time back and forth. So that's the way I deal with it. As far as your, Mr. Pulaski, as far as your conflict of interest comment, I guess that's up to you guys. Like, we all have standards that we, under the ethics commissioner, we state those conflicts. But is there something special under being a medical professional that you, like, is it case by case, or how does it work?
It's usually, and Matt, I think will agree with this, that usually on when studies are published, for example, or when people are speaking, they declare any conflict of interest, because especially with big pharma, when somebody is giving a presentation or advocating for a certain drug, and it turns out have been paid or received benefits from that company, then it creates at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. And usually that has to be declared because potentially it influences the conclusions they're coming to.
May I suggest that right now we're dealing with the motion on time. Can we then entertain Marcus's concern after we voted on this? Do you want to suggest, if everyone is in agreement that the Bloc should have some more time, how would you like
No, that's not true.
You don't agree with it?
on a case-by-case basis. That's what Luke and I
Okay, so that's what you're
discussed.
suggesting. So then we may have to call the question on the time with regard to the block. I'm going to entertain anybody wanting to speak to Luke's suggestion, other than Dan. No, everyone is silent. So, Clerk, would you like to call the question on this? Those in favor of the current times as expressed in the motion read by Ms. Chi, will you let me know? Those in favor? Those opposed? So this motion carries. Now, Mr. Pulaski, you brought up a motion with regard to conflict of interest.
If the Conservatives are in agreement, we should have it. Then yeah, let's put it in. But if they're not, then let's just move on.
Have what?
Well, just a declaration with any witness if they have a conflict of interest.
Mr. Strauss, on this question?
Sorry, there's, Madam Chair, thank you. There's two things I'm not understanding. One, is this conflict of interest concern for witnesses or for committee members? If it
For witnesses.
Mr. Pulaski moved it, so I'll give him an opportunity to explain exactly what he means.
For witnesses.
For witnesses.
Madam Chair, that proposal makes a great deal of sense to me.
All right, so you're in favor of it? Yes, Mr. Elson.
Yes, thank you. I agree as well. I think we've had witnesses on my previous experience in HESA that came with, one perspective without declaring that, in fact, they had a significant funding base that, was potentially influential to their statements, that there would have been a very different context had those conflicts been declared. So I think that's I'm in favor of this.
Anyone else wishing to speak to it? No? So then could I, yes, Matt?
Chair, is the motion on the floor right now? Like, is
It
the motion
is, yes,
constructed?
Mr. Pulaski moved it.
And then I guess I would just like some more detail about defining conflict. Like if I work for a advocacy group, presumably my salary is paid for that advocacy group. Is that presumed, or they would have to explain all of their employment? And is it only financial conflicts of interest, or we're talking about spousal and beyond? Is it all going to be honor system? So just maybe some more detail about that before it comes to a vote.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm going to entertain the other questions before Marcus answers. He can answer them all in one fell swoop. So I have Ms. Chi, and then Mr. Elfson. Doug, Maggie first, then Doug. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if we can deal with the routine motions first before delving into the conflict of interest motion that's just being proposed on the floor.
It's on the floor already. It's Chi,
okay.
so I'm sorry. Let's deal with it. Get rid of it. So, okay, we have Mr. Doug. Will you like to speak to it?
Yeah, I'm in favor of the concept of this. I'm just wondering if we need to draft a motion with more detailed frames of reference so that we can, look this over in the meantime. And because right now there's no strict definition of what this is, like Mr. Strauss said. What does this entail? Is it financial? Is the conflict of interest due to associations? I think there might be a little too much that we would have to define before we move on this. So I would be in favor of delaying this motion until a more detailed motion with more detailed frames of reference could be brought in.
All right, so you look to this issue.
Je voudrais essayer de...
I want to clarify. I know that there are some questions. There are groups that are invited because they represent various companies. That happens. So we know that when they speak before us, they are representing their members and their companies that have interests. There's no issue there. It could happen that we might decide to invite an expert witness in a given field. Witnesses that we have received at the Health Committee, for the most part, were ethical enough to declare at the outset of their opening remarks that they were in a conflict of interest or that they had a particular interest. When we invite experts that are researchers, we know that research funding comes from government. So are they in a conflict of interest? We won't be able to make a definition here. We need to agree that we could ask the question to a witness. If I think there might be a conflict of interest, I can ask that person the question, and that would clarify any issues. That would help us, and we wouldn't have to work on a definition. I think that's how we could work. If we have a concern, we ask the question. We could ask them, before your opening remarks, do you have a conflict of interest to declare it to committee members, yes or no? And then we move on to the opening remarks. That's how I would suggest we function.
Doug, I don't want us to spend too much time discussing this. We can do this in greater detail at another time. Because Marcus had brought it forward in the middle of the time, and I told him that we're only discussing time allocation here, I allowed him to bring this motion forward. But I don't want us to waste too much time. We should get done with the routine motion. So unless there's any further debate, perhaps, Marcus, you can bring this forward at a particular time. Dan?
I like Doug's suggestions. Let's table it. Let's get some definitions.
Yes.
I understand, Marcus. I know well intended and not the rabbit hole. So let's get some definitions. If there is some special stuff that has to be considered for medical community, and with the doctor sitting around the table, that's good.
So
let's table it for today.
A sort
That's what
of
I'm
amendment,
suggesting.
really, that says we should table this and deal with it later. Those in favor? Those opposed? So that motion carries. And we will move now to the continuation of routine motions. Ms. Chi.
Document distribution, that only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, and only when the documents are in both official languages, and that all documents submitted to the committee in both official languages that do not come from a federal department, member's office, or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to members, and that the witnesses be advised accordingly.
I'm sorry, we have the routine motion. Those in favor? Anybody opposed? Nobody's opposed. The routine motion carries. Ms. Chi.
Working meals, that the clerk of the committee at the discretion of the chair be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees.
Those in favor? Any discussion on the meals? Anybody want to do a nutritional rundown on those? No? Okay, so we go ahead. This motion is carried. Okay. The next one, Ms. Chi.
Travel, accommodation, and living expenses of witnesses, that if a requested reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair.
Discussion? No? Then those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Go ahead, Ms. Chi.
Access to in-camera meetings, that unless otherwise orders, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by 1 staff member at in-camera meetings, and that 1 additional person from each house officer's office be allowed to be present. That during in-camera meetings, committee members may be informed by the committee chair of the MPs who have been designated as substitute for permanent members in order to know which MPs are authorized to speak and vote during these committee meetings. That only those who have been recognized and identified as such be authorized to speak in keeping with the usual agreed rules of order and decorum.
Any discussion? No? Those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries.
Transcripts of in-camera meetings, that one copy of the transcript of each in-camera meetings be security retained by the committee clerk for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff, and that the analysts assigned to the committee have access to the in-camera transcripts.
Discussion? In favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Notice of motion that a 48-hour notice interpreted as 2 nights be required for any substantive motion to be moved in committee unless the substantive motion relates directly to the business then under consideration, provided that A, the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Thursday and no later than 2:30 p.m. on Friday. B, the motion be distributed to members and the offices of the whip of each recognized party in both official languages by the clerk on the same day the said notice was transmitted if it was received no later than the deadline hour. C, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day.
In favor? Opposed? Carried.
Orders of reference from the House respecting bills. That in relation to orders of the reference from the House respecting bills, A, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, write to each member who is not a member of the caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of the committee in both official languages any amendments to the bill, which is the subject of the said order, which they would suggest that the committee consider, be suggested amendments filed pursuant to paragraph A at least 40 hours prior to the start of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill to which the amendments relate shall be deemed to be proposed during the said consideration, provided that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in respect to a given bill. And C, during the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representation in support of them.
Comments? Discussion? No. Those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carried.
Technical tests for witnesses, that the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House and Administration support team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advise the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests.
Any discussion? Those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries.
With access to digital binders, that the clerk of the committee be authorized to grant access to the committee's digital binder to the offices of the whips of each recognized party.
Any discussion? Those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries.
Maintenance of order and decorum, that during meetings, the chair, if necessary, uses her prerogative to suspend the meeting to maintain the order and decorum necessary to ensure the application of House of Commons policies on workplace health and safety.
Any discussion? No. Those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. We have finished with the routine motions. We have had an agreement that we will table Mr. Pulaski's decision at another meeting where we can discuss basically what the definitions are, because I think that was what was in question here. And so I think, yes, Dan?
I wanted to bring something to the committee's attention. The last Parliament, there was a report that didn't make final stages for the government to receive an answer back from the committee. It was the report was on achieving better outcomes for breast cancer screening. So what I have is a motion. I'm seeking unanimous consent from the committee to request that the government table the report and then the chair present the report to the House, so Canadians can actually hear what the government has to say about this important subject.
All right. I'm going to open this up for discussion. I see no hands. Yes, Marcus?
Sorry, to clarify, what is the report you're looking for?
Breast cancer.
Here, I'll read the motion actually. So that given that the committee members, staff, clerk, and analysts and witnesses worked hard to produce a report entitled "Saving More Lives, Improving Guidance, Increasing Access, and Achieving Better Outcomes in Breast Cancer Screening." during the first session of 44th Parliament, and given that the government did not table a response because of prorogation of Parliament, the committee deemed that it has undertaken and completed a study on saving more lives, improving guidance, increasing access, and achieving better outcomes in breast cancer screening, pursuant to Standard Order 108, and that it adopt the report as the report from this committee. Pursuant to Order 109, the committee requests the government to table a comprehensive report to the report, supplementary or dissenting reports that accompanied the report in previous session of Parliament be tabled with the main report, and the chair present the report to the House. So that's the motion. It just basically follow up on from the last report.
Point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Doug, and then Luke.
Point d'ordre.
Oh, point of order. Sorry.
Oui.
Point of order. I believe that the motion should be distributed. I know there should be a French version so that interpreters are able to read it in French as it is written. So, when tabling a motion, we should have the habit of sharing the motion. I propose that we suspend a few minutes so that we can send the document.
Everybody has
I will
it.
suspend while we send the motion forward because I don't have it. I don't think anybody else seems to. Suspend? Discussion? Yes, Doug?
No, I think this sounds like an important topic. Just splitting hairs because we have to be in all this really technical language. It had been tabled, so I think the motion would be to re-table it. But I think this is I think that really minor amendment. But I agree that I think this is important, and I would support this.
Don?
Yeah, just I was looking for UC. Just basically, the committee did do a lot of work. It was great to there's a lot of important information here that Canadians deserve to know, especially those with breast cancer. It is a very important subject that I think we all have a duty to report back to Canadians. and the government needs to respond to what this committee found.
Absolutely, yeah. As I say, I was just using the language that to retable it so that because otherwise, if we send it in with that, then someone will say, well, it was tabled. It just prevents confusion down the line. But yes, I agree. It should be tabled, and we should bring this forward. I support that.
I think it was tabled in the House on December the 14th, 2024, and so I think it would be a good idea to retable it so we can discuss it again or whatever you want to do, but it's already been tabled in the House, and so your question is to get a government response. Is that your question?
It has to be brought.
Yes.
Has to be brought
Has
back.
to be brought back to this
all
committee.
the steps are right on this motion.
Okay. So I think that is fine. I'm getting a sense that there is unanimous consent to that. So we shall move on.
Thank you, committee.
I think we've done all of the motions, the routine motions, and we have entertained this motion from Dan. And I think unless somebody has a burning desire to bring up something else, Yes,
question?
Dan.
Do we have a Thursday meeting?
Do we have a pardon?
Thursday meeting.
Yes, I don't know. I'll have to get the clerk to tell us. Do we have a room? What is going on? Do we have a Thursday meeting? I can't hear you, Mr. Ru. Will you turn on your mic, please?
Sorry, Madam Chair. If everything is finished, can I move to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn. There's
I
no
had a
debate.
question on, do we have resources and everything available for Thursday?
We could ask that question. I think the clerk will let us know, and she will send a note out to you if we do have a meeting. Okay? So that's good. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.